The first sound was the rush of wind tearing through the broken nose of the bomber. The second was the scream of engines that no longer answered the controls. Louis Zamperini was in the belly of a crippled B-24 over the Pacific on May 27, 1943, watching the altimeter spin downward. The plane, a worn-out Liberator called Green Hornet, had been sent on a search and rescue mission. Now it was the one going down. Metal shuddered. The ocean rose in the windows. Someone yelled, "Prepare for impact!" Louis grabbed what he could, braced, and then the world became noise and violence. The bomber slammed into the water, snapped in two, and vanished in a cloud of foam and debris. Men and equipment were hurled forward. Most of the crew never had a chance. Louis was dragged under with the wreckage, tangled in wires and gear, the weight of the Pacific squeezing the air from his chest. He clawed at the cords that pinned him in place. At the last possible moment he tore free, shot upward, and burst into the sunlight. The sky was empty. Oil spread across the swells in a rainbow sheen. Torn aluminum drifted on the surface. Louis gasped air into burning lungs and scanned the water. There was one yellow life raft, then another. He saw two men. One was the pilot, Russell Phil Phillips, clinging weakly to the side. The other was tail gunner Francis Mac McNamara. The rest of the 11-man crew had disappeared. Louis swam to the raft, dragging Phil with him. They hauled themselves over the rubber sides and floated there, dazed, while the remains of the bomber sank out of sight. When the adrenaline faded, they took inventory. They had 2 small rafts, a handful of flares, a repair kit, a little chocolate, a few tins of water, and a fishing line. No radio, no real navigation tools, no way to steer. The current was already taking them. At first, they told themselves a search plane would find them within a day or two. Louis knew how these missions were run, but hours passed, and no aircraft came. The horizon stayed empty. The sun burned down on them. The first night, sharks began circling the rafts. Their dorsal fins cut silent paths through the dark water. The men could hear bodies bumping against the rubber. Sometimes a shark surged upward and hit the side of the raft hard enough to nearly flip it. Food and water became their main problem. Mac panicked and, in the dark, ate all of the emergency chocolate supply, leaving only a smear of brown in the container by morning. Louis and Phil stared at the empty tin, understanding that one of their few lifelines was gone. They were furious, but fury didn't change anything. From then on, survival would depend on what they could pull from the sea and sky. Each morning, Louis studied the surface of the ocean, looking for any sign of fish. Flying fish sometimes leapt into the raft and became meals, eaten raw, every part saved. When they managed to catch a small shark with their hands and improvised line, they cut it open and ate even the liver, forcing it down despite the taste. Rain showers were rare and precious. When clouds finally gathered, they held out every container they had, letting drops fall into their mouths until the storm passed. Days blurred into one another, marked only by sunrises, sunsets, and the slow deterioration of their bodies. Lips cracked and bled, skin blistered and peeled, their faces hollowed. They spoke about home and family and meals they wanted to eat. Phil, a devout man, prayed out loud. Louis, who had grown up as a troublemaker before becoming an Olympic runner, focused on small tasks, patching leaks, cleaning fish, rationing what little they had. Mac deteriorated fastest. The guilt of eating the rations, the constant hunger, and the physical stress overwhelmed him. Weeks into the ordeal, he weakened and grew quiet. One morning, Louis and Phil woke to find him still, eyes closed, his body finally giving out. They said a few words and lifted him over the side, committing him to the sea. Then there were 2. The ocean did not relent. On one day, a Japanese bomber spotted them and opened fire, strafing the rafts. Bullets punched through the rubber and churned the water. Louis and Phil rolled into the sea, hiding beneath the raft while sharks swarmed in confusion. When the plane finally left, they scrambled back into the torn rafts and set to work with the repair kit, sealing holes as best they could. On another day, a U.S. plane flew over but did not see them. Louis waved frantically, shouting into the wind, but the aircraft kept going, shrinking into a dot against the blue. The loss hit hard. They were still alive and still invisible. By the time they neared the end of their 47 days adrift, Louis and Phil were hardly recognizable. Their ribs showed through their skin, beards covered their faces. Then, in mid-July 1943, they saw land, the outline of an atoll in the Marshall Islands. Relief washed over them, but it came with a new fear. The islands were under Japanese control. They drifted closer until Japanese sailors spotted them. A patrol boat approached, men on deck shouting. There was no strength left to flee. Louis and Phil were hauled aboard, their ordeal on the rafts over. A new one was about to begin. They were taken first to Kwajalein, a small atoll that served as a military outpost and interrogation site. The prisoners called it Execution Island. Louis and Phil were thrown into tiny, sweltering cells and subjected to questioning, beatings, and threats. The food was barely enough to keep them alive. From Kwajalein, Louis was transferred to Ofuna near Yokohama, an unregistered camp where high-value prisoners were held and abused. There, he met other captured flyers and sailors. They shared scraps of information about the war and the names of men who had vanished in combat and ended up in the same place. Beatings were routine. Starvation was deliberate. Guarded by men who considered them less than human, they lived one day at a time. Eventually, Louis was sent to Omori, a prisoner of war camp on an artificial island in Tokyo Bay. It was there that he encountered Mutsuhiro Watanabe, a guard the prisoners called the Bird. Watanabe took special interest in Louis, both because of his Olympic past and because he refused to break. The guard beat him with belts, clubs, and fists, often for minor or invented offenses. Louis was forced to stand for hours, to crawl, to endure public humiliation in front of other prisoners. Later, he was moved again to Naoetsu, a camp in northern Japan where forced labor in a coal yard and harsh winters added new layers of suffering. Watanabe was there too, and the torment continued. Louis hauled heavy loads on starving legs. If he stumbled, he was struck. Fellow prisoners later described watching him absorb blows that would have dropped stronger men. In August 1945, word filtered into the camp that the war was over. At first, the prisoners did not believe it. Then they saw guards behaving differently, heard planes overhead that no longer aimed at them, watched as old flags came down. Allied aircraft began dropping supplies. One day, a B-29 flew over Naoetsu and dropped food and clothing. The men rushed to the piles, laughing, crying, struggling to process the fact that they were finally free. Louis Zamperini returned home to the United States, thin, scarred, and haunted by what he had endured. The crash, the 47 days on the raft, and the years in Japanese captivity left deep psychological wounds that would take years to confront. But he had survived what should have been impossible twice, first on the open Pacific, then in some of the worst camps of the war. His story became one of the most remarkable survival accounts of World War II, a reminder of what a human being can endure when there is nothing left but will. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.